Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, hello guys. Annyeonghaseyo. Welcome back to my channel, Versi August. Oke, sekarang aku akan menceritakan sebuah buku yang berjudul Green Tea dari Joseph Sheridan Levine. Sini aku akan ceritain secara singkat ya, supaya yang poin-poinnya saja supaya teman-teman bisa mengerti. But versi English menggunakan bahasa Inggris. Jadi ini adalah tugas. Karena itu saya akan menceritakan menggunakan versi Inggris. Tapi jika teman-teman menyukai cerita-cerita seperti ini, di lain waktu saya akan menceritakan sebuah novel lagi dengan menggunakan bahasa Indonesia. Jika suka, jangan lupa komentar, like, and subscribe. Okay, next to the story. Dr. Martin Hesselius, an eccentric physician, student of the esoteric, and a cold investigator, something of a cross between Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Faust, Van Helsing, and Father Brown, who was traveling through England during the Regency era, when he encountered the strange and unsettling case of Rev Jennings, a studious vicar whose only apparent vice are an obsession with mysticism, and late night reading being fooled by green tea. Nonetheless, Jennings' friends are concerned about him. He seems to be depressed, and although they don't play it, he is growing paranoid and even appears to be seeing things. He has taken leave of absence from his parish in the Warwickshire countryside, and is spending more and more time cloistered in the library of his town's house in the London suburb of Richmond. Hesselius agreed to meet with Jennings to assess whether he is suffering from something psychological, supernatural, or possibly both. Hesselius finds him to be neat, polite, and congenial, but unquestionably nervous and disturbed. He notes that the vicar's eyes frequently track along the carpet as if watching some invisible thing move back and forth on the floor. After meeting at the house of one of Jennings' friends, Lady Mary, Hesselius takes her aside Sherlock Holmes styles to test his deductions. He has inferred that Jennings is a bachelor, that he is currently working on a complex book on an abstract nature, that he drinks copious amounts of green tea, and that at least one of his parents had reported seeing ghosts. Lady Mary is stunned, since she had made no mention of these particulars, and each is true. Hesselius' professional interest has been engaged, and he agrees to visit Jennings at his town house on the wooded outskirts of Richmond. He is fascinated by Jennings' character, well-liked and admired, yet reclusive, a respected Anglican reverend, yet obsession with Oriental occultism. In many ways, the two men are very similar. They are both single, comfort old bachelors who have traded the warmth of family life for monastic, literary pursuits. Indeed, Jennings is familiar with Hesselius' metaphysical readings, and he is annoyed by his visit. When he is shown inside by the servant, Jennings is not there, so Hesselius waits in his library. It is a fittingly gothic front, dark, tall and shadowy, with two long windows and an almost shockingly vast collection of occult words. As impulse haunted police, it becomes apparent that the library is an allegory for Jennings' dark mind, and Hesselius is drawn to a text where he finds an open book which is heavily annotated. One bookmarked page has the following quote underscored: "When man's interior sight is opened, which is that of his spirit, then there appear the things of another life, which cannot possibly be made visible to the bodily sight." Swenderberg goes on to theorize that there are some demonic spirits which can be drawn from hell to associate with human beings who share some spiritual trait with them. However, once the spirits realize that their companions are mortal and not of the spirit world, they will become driven with hatred to seek their host's destructions. In the margin next to this paragraph, Jennings has written, "God, me." At this moment, Hesselius looks up into the mirror over the text and sees Jennings' face. The clergyman is standing behind his guest and reading over his shoulders, and Hesselius quickly recognizes that he has trespassed upon Jennings' inner thoughts. They both pretend that embracing has occurred, however, and they began to discuss a manuscript of Hesselius' metaphysical theories which Jennings has enjoyed reading. They briefly touch on Jennings' melodies. He dismisses the theories of his physicians, Dr. Hadley, as the stupid cater of a mere materialist, but he remains reserved and secretive on the topic. After a polite but unsubstantial conversation, they part ways, and Hesselius is left to ponder his findings. It isn't long after, however, that Jennings, who had returned to his parish in an attempt to resume his preaching, unexpectedly retreats back to London and begs Hesselius to see him. He arrives at dusk as the scarlet sunset clashes with the deepening shadows, underscoring the story's themes of intersecting dimensions and the shadow liminal spaces between the material, mortal world and the spiritual, psychic realm. When Hesselius enters Jennings' gloomy study, his ghostly surroundings are striking. The faint glow of the west, the palm of the 10 lonely woods of Richmond, were before us, behind and about us the darkening room, and on the stony face of the sovereign for the character of his face, though still gentle and sweet, was changed than them. Old glow which seems to discuss and produce, where it touches, likes, sudden so faint, which are lost, almost without gradations, in darkness. The silence, too, was utter, not a distant wail, or bang, or whistle the nature, so not even vaguely the particulars of the revelations I was about to receive. For that fixed face, observing that so oddly fleshed, stood out, like a portrait of circles before its background of darkness. Convinced that honesty is his only hope, Jennings begins his tale. 4 years prior, he had begun a massive literary project, a book on the Gnostic mysticism of ancient cultures, that led him to spend late nights reading, filled by regular cups of strong, black tea. However, after much experimentation, he decided to switch to green tea unlike black tea. It kept him awake without clouding his mind or making his nerves jittery. From this point on, he started to become addicted to the drink and began keeping later and later hours, poring over metaphysical texts on the occult. Kept awake by this ostensibly tainted green tea, Janice begins to see strange things at night to parallel red balls of light moving about the floor. One night, while riding home on an omnibus, he noticed the bottom-sized balls of light watching him from the darkness. As they moved about the empty bus, he realized that they are the glowing eyes of a small, black monkey which grins knowingly and malevolently at him from the shadows. He pokes at it with his umbrella, but it passes through the monkey as through mist. It follows him when he steps off the bus, and although he writes it off as a hallucination caused by indigestion, it begins to haunt him from the forward. Often it will appear sluggish and lazy, but whenever he preaches from the pulpit, it will grow violent, crunching on the Bible and blocking its word while grinding its fangs. It had a habit of disappearing at intervals. At once after a 3-month absence, it returned angrier than ever, preventing him from praying, but maneuvering blasphemous obscenities in his ear as he begs from redemption. Eventually, it grew so strong that he began to see it even when he closes his eyes, and its messages become even more sinister, ordering him to harm himself or others. In fact, the monkey's voice melts into Jennings' own inner thoughts and begins urging him to commit suicide. At one point, Jennings' darkest moment, he is walking through the countryside with a party of friends when he falls beside an abandoned coal mine shop. As the party continues on, she stares down the black hole and is drawn to the edge. Suddenly, the beast's voice urges him to throw himself down its mouth, and surely would have. As if that his knees found him and broke his strength, Jennings is increasingly desperate as the monkey's voice becomes louder and more determined to destroy him. Within, as dark as they are now, he has no hope of surviving, but Hasilis has heard enough to make diagnosis, prognosis, and prescription. He urges Jennings to have faith in God and to not lose hope. He has been preserved so far, and it must be for a reason. He defers to love a treatment plan, begging Jennings to call on him at once if the monkey returns. He orders Jennings' servant to keep a close, paternal watch on his master and promises to be available on the instant in case something goes wrong. But Hasilis feels like Jennings. He is drawn to solitude and does his planning at a ruined inn, far from his known lodges. He becomes distracted and lost in his research, and by the time he returns, he learns that Jennings' servant has been searching everywhere for him, and finds the following letter from his master. Dear Dr. Hesselius, it is here. You had not been an hour gone when it returned. It is speaking. It knows all that has happened. It knows everything. It knows you. And it's frantic and atrocious. It reviles, and I send to you. It knows every word I have written, I write. This I promise, and I therefore write, but I fear very confused, very insolently, and I am so interrupted, disturbed. Realizing that his patience is in dire strait, Hesselius rushes to his house only to be greeted by servants with pale-faced and blood-stained hands. Jennings had been concerning his servants earlier that night with his dejected, depressed attitude, and his increasing sense of desperation. After helping him undress, he asked a servant to tell him the truth. Has he heard anyone cursing? No, hadn't. He hadn't. And Jennings weakly retorted, No, of course, no. Shortly after, the servant found the door locked, and by midnight he began to worry. So he knocked, but got no response. The servants decided to break the door down, and they discovered that Jennings has committed suicide by cutting his throat with a razor. The servant refused to describe the skin, but admitted that it was a frightful gash, and Hesselius caught a glimpse of an immense pool of blood between the bed and the window. As with many suicides, Jennings' death astonishes his community even Hesselius, who notes Mr. Jennings was very gentle and very kind. All his people were fond of him. I could see that the servant was very much moved. So, dejected and agitated, I passed from that terrible house and its dark canopy of elms, and I hope I shall never see it more. While I write to your feet, I feel like a man who has but half awake from a frightful and monotonous dream. My memory rejects the picture, and with incredulity and horror. Okay, guys, thank you. Thank you for your attention. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye bye.